Hey guys, Miss King here, and this screencast we're going to review the scientific method. You have 3 indicators for the scientific method, and make sure your pencil is ready to jot down some notes. Don't forget that if you need to pause or rewind, you have that option for video. Alright, so the first part of the scientific method is going to be making observations. The first thing you have to do is discover your problem. So to make an observation, we're going to need to use our senses to gather some kind of information. So you're going to see something or hear something or smell something. Observations are not the same as an inference. The difference is that an inference is going to be some kind of conclusion that you're going to form based on facts. So to give you an example, an observation I could make right now is that Miss King is wearing a pink shirt. Well, I can use that observation to make an inference. Miss King has on the pink shirt, therefore she must like the color pink. So the two are not the same thing. Make sure you don't mix those up. Once you have your observations, you can ask questions about your observations. This is going to be your problem. And you have to make sure that your questions have a possible answer. There are some questions out there that you just really can't answer. For example, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, we can't really answer that. Okay, so make sure that your question has a possible answer. Once you have your questions together, you can start thinking of a hypothesis. In class, we need to make sure that our hypotheses are in the form of an if-then statement. And we need to also make sure that they're testable. We can write a hypothesis, but if it's not testable, then it's not valid. Also, you can make an educated guess. So if you're familiar with your topic, it could be some form of an educated guess. To become educated on your topic, you need to do some research. You can look in your books. You can look at internet sites that are reliable. You can interview experts, and of course make your own observations. So here's an observation. Sheldon saw a moth flying around the porch. If I wanted to use this observation to write a hypothesis, I might say something like, if the light is turned off, then the moth will fly away. Okay, this is a hypothesis. I wrote it in the form of an if and then statement. I can test this hypothesis. If I go outside and I turn the light off, I can watch to see if that moth will fly away. So my hypothesis is valid. Here's some other examples. If you walk under a ladder, then you will have bad luck. Is this a valid hypothesis? Well, we can, walk under a ladder, but can we really test whether or not somebody has bad luck? I don't think we can test that. So we're going to say that this one is not valid. All right. If the sky is blue, then it must be nighttime. Well, we can look outside to see the sky is blue, and we can check to see what time it is, whether it's daytime or nighttime. So this hypothesis is valid. We can test it. And for the third one, if the patient is sick, then it must be a bacterial infection. Well, we can always go in and check our patient to see whether or not they have bacteria or a virus or a fungus. So we can test that. So that means that hypothesis is valid. And we'll work some more of those problems in class. All right, the next part of the scientific method, once we have a valid hypothesis, is to do an experiment. And there's several steps involved in doing an experiment. The first thing you have to do, you have to test your problem. So you want to make sure that your experiment addresses your problem. You're going to need to identify what variables you have, and we'll look at that in just a second. You'll need a list of materials for your experiment and a procedure. And your procedure should always be step by step, so that if you were to give your experiment to somebody else, they could follow your directions and do your experiment the same exact way that you did it. So make sure that your procedure is clear and that it has every step that needs to occur in the experiment. And then, of course, you're going to actually do the experiment to get your results. And one more thing about an experiment, we want to make sure that it's a controlled experiment. And what that means is that you're only testing one variable at a time, and that variable is able to be measured. Okay, if it's not measurable, then we can't really test it. All right, so the variables that we need to look at. First of all, a variable is the factor that's going to be changed in an experiment. So we have independent variables. This is what you're testing or changing in an experiment. There's dependent variables. This is going to be what you are measuring in the experiment. The dependent variable depends on what changes. So this is what you're measuring. And then you have your control variables. Now, you have two types of control variables. This is going to be the factor that's going to stay the same. One type of control variable is called a control group, and you're going to use that to compare your results. You also have what are called constant variables, and these constants are items that simply stay the same in an experiment. Okay. Once you have conducted your experiment, you're going to collect data. Okay, so this is the information that you're going to get from your experiment. There's two different kinds of data. We have quantitative data, and these are measurement observations. So they're literally going to be 5 ducks in this picture. We can count that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that is a measurable observation. Qualitative data is based on appearance. So I could say the ducks are yellow. Okay, I can look at those ducks and see that they are yellow. So that would be qualitative data. One of the ways that I remember the difference between the two, quantitative has the letter N. N for numbers. Here's my number. Qualitative has the letter L. L for looks. And here's what they look like. They're yellow. Okay, so maybe that'll help you to remember which one is which. All right. After the data is collected in an experiment, the next step is to analyze the results. This is where you're literally going to explain what happened in your experiment. Did it work? Did it not work? Did you have any errors or problems to occur? And once you have determined what problems or errors, you can also organize your data. And we will look at organizing the data in another lesson, but these are things like making charts and tables or graphs. Any of those things could be different ways to analyze and organize your data. All right, and then once you've organized your data, you can draw your conclusions, explain what happened, check your hypothesis. Does your hypothesis work or does it not? You're going to discuss what went wrong. If you did have any errors or problems, how would you change that for the next time? And how does your experiment relate to everyday life? If you do an experiment and it has no usefulness in everyday life, then it's pointless. You always want to make sure that your experiment is going to have some kind of use. And then once you've determined all that information, you're going to communicate your results with other people. You can do reports, you can publish a book, you can put it on the internet or in an article. There's lots of different ways to communicate scientific results. Those other scientists that are out there, they'll take a look at your experiment, and many of them will try to replicate your results, and they will publish their findings, and eventually more and more data, if your hypothesis is supported, could lead to a theory. Okay, so when you get to the end, you always want to make sure you take a look at whether or not your result supports the hypothesis. If it does, you'll communicate your results and repeat your experiments, and again, it'll be on the road to becoming a theory. If your hypothesis does not is not supported by your results, then you still want to communicate your errors with the other scientists. You'll still want to repeat that experiment to see if you get the same results. And if you could, possibly form a new hypothesis and try doing a new experiment to get a different result. So whether or not your hypothesis is correct doesn't matter. Okay, you will always learn something from a tested hypothesis. You know, if your hypothesis turns out to be wrong, well, you still learned that what you thought was not the case. So a wrong hypothesis is still a valid hypothesis, and it's still worth going through the experiment to see what will happen. Okay, and that is the scientific method. When you come to class, we will do some practice with identifying the variables and writing hypotheses, looking at some data and organizing our data into charts and graphs. Okay?